these? They're the Sky Blood. They called you to me.
Flares and flare guns. Flare guns get some of the best attention in the movies and on TV, with some of the best dramatic uses imaginable. But how are they really used, and what's their history? The first use of gunpowder for signaling dates back as early as the 13th century China, and rockets would be used throughout history for signaling after this time. Starting in the mid-19th century, rockets and rocket-propelled parachute flares became a standard for most modern navies. By 1875, the British regulated distress rockets, with passenger ships required to carry a minimum of 12. Different colors could indicate different signals, and a ship in distress was to fire a rocket once every minute, which the Titanic, for example, failed to do. Rockets and flares were particularly essential on ships before the 20th century, when radio communication was in its infancy. Radios on ships became common around the 1910s, with the United States regulating radios on ships with the Wireless Ship Act of 1910. Since the 1950s, red has been adopted as the universal color of distress at sea. The International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS, has universal standards for flares used at sea. An aerial flare, for example, must burn at least for 40 seconds, with a 30,000 candela average luminosity. Flare guns became another option along with rockets in 1877, when U.S. Naval officer Edward Very patented the design for a break-action flare pistol, firing a shotgun-like cartridge. The majority of all flare guns would use a similar design, most firing between 1 and 1.5 inch shells. In World War I, many British and American soldiers would refer to their flare guns, regardless of manufacturer, as Very pistols, after the inventor. A World War I song sung in the trenches was titled, "When Very Lights Are Shining," sung to the tune of "When Irish Eyes Are Smiling." Flares were very tactically important during World War I. With no radios, flares were needed to signal the taking of a trench, the outcome of an attack, or even the need for an artillery strike. Communication was done using flare color patterns. Flare signal colors had to be carefully changed frequently, as the enemy would try and spoof flares to give false signals. Some flares would have serrations or tactile markings so a soldier could select the color of a flare, even in the dark. Larger flares could be fired from artillery or dropped from aircraft. These flares could be attached to parachutes, allowing them to linger in the sky for longer. Aircraft needed to light up targets, signal ground crews, anti-aircraft gun crews, and other aircraft using flares. This extended into World War II and beyond. This is an example of a trapdoor from a B-17 bomber, allowing a flare pistol to be fired from inside the aircraft. Parachute flares usually burn for under a minute, and a bright one can be seen as far away as 45 kilometers. On a cold day, the hot air from a flare can rise up into the chute, allowing it to be suspended in the air for as long as the flare burns. An additional use aircraft have for flares in modern times is as a countermeasure for infrared homing missiles. Besides light, flares can give off a tremendous amount of heat. Flares can also be used underwater, and during World War II, flares were experimented with for detecting submarines. Flares that burn underwater typically use calcium mixed with an oxidizer like a sulfate or nitrate compound. Oxidizing materials can supply combustible substances with oxygen and support a fire even when air is not present. Flares are and have been made of several different combustible ingredients, often based on strontium nitrate, potassium nitrate, or potassium perchlorate, mixed with a fuel such as charcoal, sulfur, sawdust, aluminum, magnesium, or a polymer resin. These combustible contents fill a shell inside a flare gun similar to a shotgun shell, which can be made of cardboard, plastic, or metal. Gunpowder in the shell is kept separate from the pyrotechnic by a hard disc, sometimes cardboard with a hole in the center. The hole ensures the flame of the burning gunpowder ignites the flare. The flare is usually sealed with wax at the end. Most flare guns are designed to launch their flares between 200 and 300 meters. meaning they are powerful enough that they can injure or even kill at close range. Flares can further burn as hot as 1600 degrees Celsius. Firefighting crews even use them to start controlled burns. So being hit by a flare can hurt you from the impact and burn you. Flare guns are also one of the few guns that can legitimately ignite targets. Bullets, as shown in the movies, lighting gasoline on fire and blowing up cars, does not happen in the real world. They simply aren't hot enough. Bullets are so bad at lighting things on fire that machine guns couldn't take out German World War I Zeppelins, despite being filled with hydrogen gas. The British invented the incendiary bullet, which used phosphorus in 1916, especially to target Zeppelins. Technically, a flare gun could also set alight a Zeppelin, but flare guns are difficult to aim, being a large low-velocity projectile that moves in the wind. They further are a one-shot deal and take time to reload. Riddling an airship with incendiary bullets worked better. That being said, there are a few examples historically of multi-shot flare guns, and flare guns designed to kill. The Japanese Navy during World War II used the multi-barrel Type 90 Nambu pistol. This flare gun has a sort of dystopian futuristic look about it, and as such has been used as a stand-in as a shotgun pistol in both Waterworld and Demolition Man. The gun was originally manufactured with 3 barrels, but this was changed to 2 in the mid-1930s. The barrels can be selected by a lever and are fired one at a time. Typically, a different type of flare was loaded into each barrel: white flares for illumination, black smoke for obscurement, and a colored flare for signaling. Germany during World War II made grenades including a heat-round grenade that could be fired from their flare pistols. There further was an attachment that could go on their regular Model 39 egg grenades, allowing them to be fired from flare guns. These weapons were not overly accurate, but did provide some additional firepower in an emergency. Arguably the most interesting flare development the Germans used during World War II was a signaling cartridge with red and green stars in different chambers. The cartridge could be twisted to set the stars to fire in a different order, for signaling purposes. There has been a significant history of men trying to weaponize flare guns or fire different objects from them. James Bond firing pitons from a flare gun isn't as absurd as it may seem. This is an example of a flare gun modified to throw lines between ships. The Soviets developed a 175-gram shell to be fired from a flare gun, but ultimately such designs are dangerous. Flare guns are built to handle firing an explosive charge for a light flare, not a grenade. Even the recoil from firing flares is substantial. Firing a grenade without at least a buttstock would be a wrist breaker, if not a gun breaker. This, of course, has not stopped many people from buying conversion kits in the United States to convert flare guns to fire 12-gauge shotgun shells. This can be extremely dangerous as most modern flare gun pistols are made from plastic. Even older metal or brass flare guns are designed to fire flares that are low pressure compared to a typical 12-gauge shotgun shell. Metal flare guns may seem more sturdy than they are. Brass, for example, was used for Navy flare guns not because of its strength, but because it's corrosion resistant. Sometimes you see them with a flared muzzle. This is to prevent a hand from sliding over the barrel and in front of the muzzle when reloading. The likely more enjoyable conversion is turning a shotgun into a flare or a pyrotechnic weapon. There are a variety of shells made for shotguns that turn them into signaling devices. Then there's the famous Dragon's Breath rounds used in John Wick 4. These are a type of incendiary using magnesium pellets that shoot flames upwards of 30 meters or sometimes more. It's unlikely there is a significant tactical use for such a round, and magnesium shards create an extreme fire risk for the user. But they do make for a cool movie scene. Alright, I'm Johnny. I hope the video sparked some joy and we were able to cast some light on this very subject. Do take care, be safe, and have a nice rest of your day.